everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're cutting into some really fundamental structures, the ones meant to protect public trust. But, well, sometimes, sadly, they end up betraying it. We're extracting some crucial insights from the latest ACI Dispatch, that's issue number 3 from July 2025. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore what the American Anti-Corruption Institute calls the new face of institutional risk.
This situation where integrity safeguards can become, well, a little more than slogans. And oversight, it just turns kind of performative. We're going to unpack insights from global banking, from boardrooms, the cutting edge of AI, and even look at small businesses, too.
Yeah, and this issue, it really does demand our full attention. It digs into how institutions sometimes maybe unknowingly enable corruption, from that silent complicity you might see in boardrooms,
Right.
to the, frankly, glaring gaps where external audits just don't quite reach. And crucially, it highlights how artificial intelligence is not just changing business like crazy.
Oh, absolutely. But it's also exposing these really fundamental fault lines in, governance and internal control.
Okay, let's unpack this first part then. The AACI kicks off with a pretty direct and urgent warning. They say anti-bribery and corruption, ABC compliance across banking has become dangerously performative in far too many places. That phrase, dangerously performative, really jumped out at me. What does it truly mean here beyond just, going through the motions?
Well, a key observation the ACI makes is that corruption in banking today,
Yeah.
it isn't always hiding behind, secret briefcases anymore. Sometimes it's wearing a compliance badge.
Wow.
They report that ABC policies are often outdated or maybe just copied from foreign templates without really thinking about the local context. And, maybe more alarmingly, internal control frameworks routinely miss things like third-party bribery.
Especially internationally.
Especially in international deals, yeah. And transactions involving politically exposed persons or BEPs, those are high-risk areas.
So is it that the tone at the top is just absent? Or maybe, like you said, it's replaced by something else?
It often seems replaced, yeah.
Yeah.
By these, glossy marketing campaigns talking up ethics and ESG compliance.
Right. Environmental, social, and governance factors.
Exactly. But behind the scenes.
It sounds like some banks might even be sort of justifying bribes, maybe calling them the price of entry into certain high-risk markets.
That's precisely the danger the ACI points to. It becomes normalized almost. And regulators, central banks, even professional associations, they often seem hesitant to act decisively.
Which risks their own credibility, doesn't it?
It does, by default. The ACI stance is, well, it's unequivocal. ABC isn't just a legal checkbox.
It's more fundamental.
It's a fiduciary duty. It's a critical risk control. And honestly, it's a test of leadership. They're specifically calling for financial institutions to embed measurable anti-corruption safeguards.
Measurable, okay.
Grounded in actual enforcement, not just looking good on paper, not just optics.
And they even offer a specific certification to help with this. The Certified Anti-Corruption Manager, CACM.
That's right. And it's designed specifically for decision makers, not just, back office compliance staff.
So it's about embedding this thinking into strategy, not just procedure.
Exactly. The goal is to shift integrity in banking from being this sort of aspirational goal to being truly operational, something measurable, real, embedded in how things are done.
Okay, moving from the banks themselves to their boardrooms. This ACI Dispatch includes a really illuminating interview. It's with a seasoned board chairman talking about tone at the top and silent complicity. Now, many boards claim they set the right tone, but we still see corruption thriving. Why is there often such a gap?
Well, the chairman makes a great point. He says tone is often confused with just having good intentions.
Ah, right.
But the real tone, he argues, it's set by what the board actually tolerates.
What they let slide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He has this quote, "Silence isn't neutral. It sends a powerful message. We're watching, but we'll do nothing." The real insight here, I think, is that corruption often flourishes in these comfort zones.
Comfort zones.
Yeah, like a board culture that's maybe too polite or too hierarchical, where any dissent gets framed as being disloyal.
That line, silence isn't neutral, that really hits home. It makes me wonder, how does a board member, or even the whole board, spot when they're crossing that blurry line, that line between loyalty to leadership and actual complicity in wrongdoing?
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting and frankly quite tricky. The chairman states pretty clearly, that when loyalty starts to override integrity, the board stops being a safeguard.
And becoming
As an enabler, he gives examples like a board member staying quiet about obvious procurement favoritism or repeated non-disclosure of conflicts of interest. All may be done to support leadership.
but undermining the whole process.
Precisely. He stresses that healthy governance actually requires a bit of discomfort. It needs disagreement, sometimes even disruption, to stay healthy.
Okay, so if comfort is dangerous, what are the practical tools? What mechanisms can boards actually use to monitor integrity in a real non-performative way?
He highlights three that really stand out. First, a solid whistleblowing infrastructure. Critically, one that bypasses management entirely.
Directly to the board committee.
Directly to the Audit or Ethics Committee, yes. And that aligns with the ACI's own standard on whistleblowing, Standard 280. Second, he talks about integrity dashboards.
Not just financial KPIs.
No, dashboards that actually quantify things like ethics incidents, compliance breaches, and importantly, the follow-up actions taken, tracking the response. And third, regular closed-door executive sessions.
Without management.
Without management present. Places where internal auditors, compliance officers, maybe even external monitors can speak completely freely. The chairman says, quite pointedly, that's where the truth surfaces.
Wow. It feels like a really powerful final lesson from him in that interview. He says, corruption doesn't knock on the boardroom door wearing a mask. It walks in as a colleague. If your boardroom feels too safe, too scripted, too harmonious, you should worry.
Yeah.
It really makes you reflect on the dynamics in meetings you attend, doesn't it? Okay, let's pivot now. Speaking of systemic risks, let's talk about something reshaping every sector, including the fight against corruption: artificial intelligence. This deep dive asks what every leader needs to know this month about AI's role here. How is AI fundamentally changing this fight?
Well, AI isn't just transforming business processes, is it? It's profoundly redefining how corruption hides, how it spreads, and how it gets exposed. It's kind of tightening the noose on weak governance and showing up flawed controls.
But there's a but.
But at the same time, it's also becoming a much more sophisticated tool for the threat actors themselves, for the people trying to commit fraud or corruption.
Right, it's that classic double-edged sword. On the one hand, we are seeing some incredible new defenses emerge. Like in India, for example, Google launched an AI-powered safety charter, the AIM, to stop over, I think it was 20,000 crore?
Which is about, what, 2.4 billion US dollars?
Yeah, around USD 2.4 billion in fraud losses just in 2025. By spanning transactions, detecting suspicious stuff in real time. And MasterCard has something called Decision Intelligence Pro, assigning real-time risk scores to, get this, nearly 160 billion transactions each year.
Wow, the scale is incredible.
Right. Anticipating and blocking organized fraud rings, identity theft, even potential inside jobs.
Yeah, and a key observation here is just the sheer sophistication of these systems. They are quietly but fundamentally redefining global standards in payment security. However, as you said, the threat actors are getting smarter with AI too.
How so?
Well, one cybersecurity firm warned about something they call synthetic repeaters.
Synthetic repeaters, what are those?
Basically, AI-generated deepfake identities, but created with minor variations again and again, and they're deployed repeatedly, automatically, just probing onboarding systems, testing them.
Until one gets through.
Until one inevitably slips through the cracks, and by the time a breach is even noticed, multiple institutions might already be compromised by these synthetic identities.
That is,
Yeah.
that's incredibly unsettling, the idea of automated deepfakes just hammering away at systems. It's quite terrifying. So what does this all mean for you as a leader listening right now? What questions should you be asking your teams, like, this month?
Well, the ACI really stresses this. AI is not optional anymore. It's not a future thing. It's embedded right now in this constant arms race between integrity and deception.
So the question is...
The critical question to ask your team is really clear. What controls do we actually have in place right now to detect and respond to AI-powered fraud? Are we ready for deepfake identities? Can we spot these synthetic onboarding risks? It's not about if anymore, it's about when and how well you respond.
And this deep dive, it really brings these abstract risks to life with some very real-world examples from just last month, June 2025. It's a pretty stark reminder that when leaders fall short, the consequences aren't small. They ripple through systems, reputations, entire nations even.
Absolutely. We see it playing out, for example, with the Spanish Prime Minister currently reeling after an ally resigned over alleged kickbacks in public works contracts. And what's the immediate call? For an external audit of party finances.
Highlighting that need for oversight again.
Exactly. It shows internal oversight isn't just, a nice to have, it's crucial for public trust.
And then there's a stark reminder from the U.S. as well. Michael Madigan, the former very powerful Speaker of the Illinois House, he received a 7.5-year prison sentence and a hefty $2.5 million fine
For what exactly?
for orchestrating a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme. It involved trading legislative favors for utility contracts and other benefits.
Wow.
It shows that even really long entrenched political power isn't immune when influence is clearly traded for profit.
Yeah, but perhaps the most surprising example, and maybe the most alarming in some ways,
What's that?
it's the news that several Big Four accounting firms, KPMG, Deloitte, and EY, were fined by U.S. regulators.
The auditors themselves. Fined for what?
For widespread cheating on their internal training exams,
Yeah.
ethics exams, compliance exams.
You're kidding. How widespread?
Staff at all levels apparently were sharing answers. And management either, failed to detect it or, perhaps worse, ignored it.
That is truly shocking, especially coming from firms whose entire business is built on auditing others for integrity. So you have national politics, state-level corruption, and now the auditors themselves. What's the consistent pattern here? What does this tell us about how integrity breaks down?
I think the consistent thread across all these cases really is the collapse of that tone at the top we talked about. It happens when ethics get sacrificed, often for performance metrics, maybe perceived political advantage, or even just convenience.
So it doesn't matter the sector.
Doesn't seem to. Whether it's blatant bribery or that silent complicity or just ignoring internal cheating. The leadership's willingness to tolerate or even enable misconduct seems to directly correlate with these systemic failures. It really shows that even the institutions we expect to uphold standards can falter badly when their own internal ethical frameworks get compromised.
Okay, let's bring this down to a very practical level now, something relevant for many listeners. The deep dive includes an SME integrity brief, focusing on something called the grant trap. Why do so many small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, seem to dangerously believe that external donor audits are enough? That those audits cover their integrity risk? What's the core misunderstanding?
Yeah, this is a really important point for smaller organizations. A key observation is this pervasive misconception that an external audit is like a silver bullet for integrity.
But it's not.
Not really, no. External audits are designed primarily to verify financial compliance. They check the numbers, they check the receipts, match the reports. But they don't typically monitor how decisions were made. They don't look into who might have manipulated the procurement process behind the scenes.
Or approved fake receipts.
Exactly. Or who signed off on maybe substandard work or delivery. That kind of operational detail. That's where internal oversight should be happening.
And often isn't in SMEs.
And very often isn't, unfortunately.
So are you saying many SMEs getting donor or government funds might be operating without even the most basic internal controls? Things like separation of duties or transparent procurement, or even a simple way for staff to raise concerns?
That's precisely the situation in many cases, yes. It's a staggering oversight, as you say.
What do you think small business leaders often miss or maybe misunderstand about managing their own internal integrity, especially when they're focused on delivering a project or service?
I think some treat that external donor audit almost like a final seal of approval. They pass the audit, they think everything must be fine. They might not realize it often only covers a small sample of transactions.
Right. Sampling risk.
Exactly. And the audit usually happens months after the project activities, months after any damage might have been done.
So the consequences.
The result is that fraud gets missed. Red flags go unnoticed. And ultimately, the SME itself risks damage to its reputation or even getting blacklisted by donors. We've seen donor-funded projects, particularly across the global south, collapse simply because those basic internal safeguards were non-existent.
And the SME pays the price.
And it's the implementing SME that bears that reputational cost. They often miss that an external audit is just a snapshot in time. It's not a continuous monitor of integrity.
Okay, so what should SMEs do instead then? If the external audit isn't enough, how can they start building real integrity into their operations, especially if resources are tight?
The key is to start small, but you have to start. The AACI offers some really clear practical advice here. First, build control directly into your existing processes. Simple things, like requiring 2 signatures for payments over a certain amount. Meticulously logging procurement decisions. Who decided what, when, why. Keeping original receipts, not just copies. Second, Designate someone specific who is responsible for integrity,
Even if it's not their full-time job.
even if it's just one project officer who has this as part of their role. Someone needs to own it. Third, actively train your staff on what corruption actually looks like in your context. Sometimes infractions happen just out of ignorance, not necessarily malice.
Right. Understanding the red flags.
Exactly. And finally, set up a basic whistleblower channel. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Oh, my.
Honestly, even a locked suggestion box or just a dedicated confidential email address can be enough to surface those crucial early warnings.
Yeah, the ACI is really firm on this point. Donor audits are absolutely no substitute for genuine internal integrity. Oversight has to start inside the organization. They even encourage folks to explore their Certified Anti-Corruption Fellow program, the CACF.
Which is designed to provide that practical foundational knowledge.
Right. So I guess the crucial question this raises for you, if you're running or working in an SME, getting external funding, is this. Are you just trusting your donor's audit process to protect your organization's reputation? Or are you actively taking steps to protect it yourself?
Wow, what a deep dive that was into these sort of hidden currents of institutional risk and integrity, from that really dangerous performative compliance we see in global banks to the quiet complicity that can creep into boardrooms,
Yeah.
and that critical, really double-edged role of AI, both detecting and worryingly enabling fraud. It's just clear the fight for real integrity is more complex, maybe more urgent than ever.
And if we zoom out for a second, I think the consistent theme running through all of this, it's that knowledge, these insights, they're most valuable when they're actually understood and applied.
Right, not just known. Exactly. The insights from this ACI dispatch really hammer home that integrity has to become operational at every single level, from the biggest global financial institution right down to the smallest SME. And maybe just as importantly, that critical thinking is absolutely essential for all of us in navigating today's, frankly, complex information landscape around risk and ethics.
So for you listening, what stands out most from this deep dive today? Is your institution, your team, truly prepared for this new face of institutional risk? Or is there maybe a danger that some of its integrity efforts are becoming, well, merely performative? Definitely something to mull over as you navigate your own professional world this week, because ultimately the fight for real embedded integrity, it starts within each organization and perhaps with each of us.